Welcome to the Discovery Files. This is episode 15. Today we're interviewing Rick Streiff about his work at the Waihi discovery in New Zealand. Rick, do you want to give an introduction of yourself and kind of some background on your work in the area?
Sure. Thanks for having me. I've always been involved in outdoor programs and outdoor stuff. As a kid, if I had my druthers, I'd be out running around in the outdoors all day long. And really, where geology began to perk my interest is I grew up in the in San Francisco Bay Area, and I had a friend whose grandfather owned a gold mine in the Mother Lode district. And we would go up there and camp out. They had a little cabin and bunkhouse there, and explore and geology and the mining perked my interest. So when I got to school, I'd pretty well made up my mind that I was going to do geology. I actually worked my way through school. I would go to school and run out of money, and then I would go work for a while. I did jackleg mining in various small mines in the Pacific Northwest, and then I also was a minerals technician for the Forest Service during the summers as well. One of the jobs I worked at was for Shiny Rock Mining Company, which we were the largest underground operation in the state of Oregon with 8 employees. And so I was, underground shifter, geologist, engineer, vice president in charge of mucking and
Yeah.
everything.
You do everything at those kind of operations, right?
That's right. Yeah. And we were snowed in, my wife and I, for about 2.5 months, shoveling snow off the roofs and stuff. So it was quite an interesting job. But I went to University of Oregon, graduated with a bachelor's in geology. And of course, by then I'd had enough of school. I wanted to get out in the real world and start working. So I started off with Echo Bay Mines at Round Mountain. And I was at Round Mountain for about 3 years. That's where I really learned the nuts and bolts of, how a drill works and the sampling and all the problems that you can have with RC sampling and how a core drill works and really just kind of the basics. I was involved in the exploration decline project there. Based on that, I got transferred up to McCoy Cove. I was at McCoy Cove for 5 years. I was basically the geologist responsible for the Cove underground and then also worked on the McCoy underground as well as doing open pit work there. And that was a really fun time. I learned a lot there. Echo Bay had just written off 1,000,000 ounces due to downhole contamination, which really just plagued that operation till the end. But for me, in the underground world, it presented some opportunities because, of course, something contaminated the hole. So I would go back through the old data that had been thrown out and look for high grade that had contaminated the hole. So I about doubled the mine life of the underground there just by following up on contaminated holes. So
Oh,
it
interesting.
was a good time. I spent a summer working on the McDonald Meadows project in Montana. Echo Bay was thinking about acquiring that, and so I was up there for a summer. From there, I transferred up to Republic, Washington. I was a chief geologist at the K2 mine, which is a low sulfidation epithermal deposit. And I got there just in time for them to start the portal and then do all the development. We drilled off K2 and we're mining it. About that time,
Wow, what an interesting time to get there too, right? Because then you just see the entirety of it unfold before you, right?
well, yeah, and at that stage it's a project, so you have to solve a lot of unknowns, right? You have to figure out how to not only the geology, but how you're going to set up the project, how you're going to record the data, how you're going to sample, cross checks on sampling to make sure that it's doing you're getting the information that you need. So, there's a lot of puzzles to figure out at that point in time. So it was interesting, and it was a small mine. It was a really good group of people. I remember we used to have our morning meetings sitting out on the back porch, myself, the mine superintendent, engineer, and the surveyor, as well as the maintenance foreman. And we'd have our morning meetings by throwing rocks at the no parking sign across the street. We literally that was our morning meeting, and we ran the mine that way. It was in place.
It sometimes doesn't take a lot of technology or infrastructure to really have a successful go at things, right? Requires good teamwork and like a group of people that can work together.
Yeah, that's exactly what it was, a group of people that worked really well together and, respected each other's opinion, and really we solved a lot of problems, beating up that no parking sign. From from there, Echo Bay was beginning to look like it wasn't gonna survive, and of course, eventually it was bought by Kenross, but, I had a friend at Barrick at Meikle that wanted me to come down and interview, so I went down and interviewed, and while I was there, I called up a friend that I'd worked at Echo Bay with at Newmont, and I said, "Hey, I'm down here interviewing." And she said, "Great, come on over and interview with us." And so I ended up at Newmont instead of Barrick.
Nice.
It was Margie Lane.
Oh, okay, yeah, yeah. No,
Yeah.
it's always enjoyable, those I don't know, like, I've always figured the networking in industry is one of the most important things for getting jobs, and it's really important to, like, to cultivate, those people that you know and trust, right? And it's yeah, because you never know where you might find yourself later, and then you reach out and it's like, "Oh, you're working there. Okay, cool."
Yeah, as you know, it's a small industry, and as you say, it's as much who you know as what you know. And I've given advice to a lot of geologists, and I always have told them, build up a network of people, of friends, and stay in touch. If nothing else, send them a joke once a month by email just to remind them, hey, I'm still here and thinking of you and stuff. Building and cultivating that network. And then the other part of that is reputation management. Like for a geologist, right, you'll look at a core log and you'll look at the name on the log and you go, uh-oh, him,
Yeah.
or you'll look at a core log or a map and say, oh, he's pretty good. This is probably pretty good data. So
Yeah, there's a
all
few folks that, like, I trust implicitly whatever they've mapped. If I see their name on it, I know I don't even need to verify it because I've worked with them before and you just see how good they are, and likewise the opposite.
Yeah. No, that's very true. So anyway, from at Newmont, they hired me because I was one of the few people in Nevada at that time that had quite a bit of underground experience between working as a jackleg miner and then I was at the underground, for 10 years with Echo Bay. So they hired me for Deep Post, and I got the Deep Post again as we were starting to drive the decline and get ready to go in and mine the deposit. That period of time, I was literally the last person that was hired at Newmont before they put on the hiring freeze. And within 6 months, they were laying off geologists because the price of gold had cratered. And that was that dark period of time when gold got down almost to 250 an ounce.
This is like the kind of the late '90s to the early 2000s in there.
Yep, I showed up at Newmont at the end of, '97, that's when the price of gold really started to slide. So it was a little
Did
weird.
you did you question your decision to jump over to Newmont at that point? Because that was a pretty dark time in the industry.
It was very dark. It was odd for me because I had a skill that Newmont needed, which was my underground experience. They were expanding into underground mining. A Deep Post was a brand new high grade underground, and they needed my expertise. But it was a little strange. I felt guilty almost because, of course, I was there and they were laying off geologists around me. Some of them had been with Newmont 15, 20 years that were being laid off. And so it was a strange time for me to be the new guy and watch all these other people, laid off. So it goes to
It's
another.
one of the things I've told a number of, like, junior geos to be very intentional about what jobs they take so that they can grow their career in different skill sets. Because I joke around, like, I think one of my first jobs was talking about, "Oh, we don't exactly need a geologist anymore, but we might need a loader operator. So if you're willing to learn how to be a loader operator." But it's really interesting how much your career and experience matters when it comes to those decisions, right? It's if it's the right fit for what they need, they'll keep you on, right? Because it's a business transaction, right? Like, they still need to stay in business, and that's the downside of layoffs is you lose good people, and they always have to make the decision of what is best for our business in the years going forward.
Well, that's right, and that's why I was there is because I had a very specific skill set that Newmont needed, which was underground geology and somebody who could be a chief geologist and open up a brand new underground. So in later years, I cultivated a different specialty, which I still am using, which is low sulfidation epithermals. Know a lot about those style of deposits as well, and that has served me well in addition to the underground mining. I
Yeah.
got to Deep Post, and just again as it was starting, and I still remember my third hole that we drilled underground, an infill hole, was 280 feet of 2.8 ounces per ton.
That's unbelievable.
Yeah, yeah, that deposit was something else, and really Deep Post and Midas literally carried Newmont, at least Newmont, Nevada, through the dark times because they were so high grade and such high margin deposits. The open pits
What
really
was
weren't making any money, but those two undergrounds were really carrying Newmont.
Yeah. What was the length and the intercept grade again on that?
280 feet of 2.8 ounces per ton.
I'm just gonna convert this. So it's 96 grams and then 280 feet, you said?
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's 85 meters. So 8,160 gram meters. That is a monster intercept. Oh, that's incredible.
Yeah, Deep Post was just an amazing deposit. It was 6 million ounces, and the average grade was about, say 18 grams, something like that.
Wow. Well, that was definitely needed during that time with the $250 gold. It's amazing to think about how much money the company made during that time at such a depressed gold price.
Yeah, the other part of it was is when I got to Newmont, they weren't quite ready to start the underground. So I was in Barrick's pit, in Newmont's portion of Barrick's pit, mapping gold strike intrusive, and I sorted out about 4 million tons for underground backfill for some of the other mines. But that layback went on for 2 years with no ore, and then we got into the bottom of the pit and we took a slice off a Deep Post, and I remember, Newmont's portion, that didn't include Barrick's, but just Newmont's portion, we for 6 months we were mining 250,000 ounces a month.
Wow. What
Yeah, just incredible amount of ounces pouring out of that pit in that layback.
do you think they'll ever find anything like that caliber again? Like, because I've seen a lot of news on 4 Mile being extremely exciting. But do you think they'll like anybody will find something like that in Nevada again?
Well, things are getting deeper and more difficult to find. I mean, it's possible, but it's going to be a big challenge to, find it. And those kind of deposits have a pretty small footprint. Deep Star was another one that ran, 32 grams, 34 grams, million ounces, but the footprint of that deposit was tiny.
Wow. Wow. I think that's always an interesting like a lot of places I've worked at have used kind of size comparisons to say, oh, it needs to be this big geographically to be worth our effort. And I've seen so many small footprint size deposits with tons of ounces in them, like 7 to 10 million or more ounces. And so it's really made me realize just how easy it is to fit some of these high grade monsters inside a pretty small footprint.
Well, Meikle was another one, right? It wasn't really that big of a deposit because it was more vertical than it was horizontal.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, Deep Post was really an incredible deposit to work at, and we, started from the beginning and drilled that off, and again started up mining it. And I was there for several years, and then we had the Normandy merger, and they needed somebody to go to Midas, and so they looked around and said, "Well, Rick knows how to underground mine veins, so we'll send him." And I was literally the first person on site at Midas and I ended up chief geologist there, moved to Winnemucca, got there just in time to meet up with all the Mormon crickets in our neighborhood.
That's such a terrible scourge of the earth.
Yeah, my wife was impressed, I can tell you that.
Yeah, yeah. No, that was like the first time one of my kids brought my wife a Mormon cricket. Like she was like, "I think it's time to move."
Yeah, we moved into our rental on Winnemucca Mountain, and we're standing at looking out the front room window with boxes all around us, and the street is literally moving because they're all coming down the street. Yeah.
Oh, that's terrible.
But Midas was, again, another really great, fun deposit, very high grade, really cool geology. I had to build it up kind of from scratch when I got there. It was still kind of a paper mine. They really didn't
Mhm.
have digital. We had to institute Vulcan and teach everybody how to use Vulcan and kind of redo the how we did, our work there, how we did ore control, for instance. We didn't really understand the geology very well, so I brought in a structural expert that really helped us get a handle on Midas much more and actually start to be able to predict things. And John Marma talks about cymoid loops. We used to call them Marma loops, but that came out of that structural study, and it proved to be very useful because we knew when we were facing north and the vein would somewhat disappear, we knew we had to step left every time.
Yeah.
So,
I I think things like that almost always pay off, right? Where it's like you just go to investigate like what is actually causative of our ore shoots, and it's very easy to like I've been to a lot of companies and mines where people like throw their hands in the air and it's like, oh, it's too complex, we can't be predictive about it. But you think about just something as simple as that, where it's like, okay, if you're facing north and it disappears, turn left. Like that's a really useful application from probably a lot of pretty involved study work, right?
yeah, and it can save the company a lot of money. You're not out there fishing around trying to figure out, well, where is this thing? It's off to my left, and it's just over there, in the rib of the tunnel a little ways.
Yeah. So at this point, you've worked for like 3, 4 different epithermal deposits, a number of Carlin deposits.
Hmm.
When you were looking at Midas, was it what you were expecting to find, or did you learn a whole bunch of brand new things from this mine that you hadn't seen elsewhere?
Yeah, no, I learned quite a bit from Midas. It was very different than K2, which was another vein epithermal system. Cove McCoy was its own animal, but it was an intermediate sulfidation. Round Mountain is its own animal. It looks quite different than a vein system. So I really, really got a chance to study a vein system in detail here. And again, it was incredibly high grade. To understand the link of grade with the geology was really good. I learned a lot at Midas. Also learned a lot. We had an excellent near mine exploration geologist, Paul Malin, and I learned a lot from Paul about how to set up an exploration program and how to run one. And he also helped me to become better at double checking everything I did and making sure it was accurate. He really imparted that habit on me, which I had to a certain degree before, but he really helped me to tighten that up. I worked again with some great people out there. I hired John Marma, what turned out to be a pretty good hire, I think, and worked with another geologist, Brian Morris, hired him out there as well. So it was a good place to work. We learned a lot. The geologists played together too. We would do weekend jeep trips all over the hills out at Midas and stuff. It
That's
was a good group.
such an enjoyable team to work on when you get to go and do things like that. Where you actually want to spend time with your coworkers on your days off, right? That's a nice sign.
Yeah, and we all had interest in jeeping together, so yeah, it was a great time. From there, I got promoted and I was responsible for kind of the western part of the state, which included Twin Creeks as well as Midas and some other projects. Twin Creeks, we had a situation there where I got to Twin Creeks at the same time the new chief geologist got to Twin Creeks. After a couple weeks of kind of getting our feet on the ground, I was with him one day. I said, well, let's look at the geology model. So he went in and looked around, couldn't find it. So we went over to the resource modeler and says, where's the geology model? And he says, well, it's right here. Couldn't find it.
Man,
And by the time we figured that out, the backup had been written over.
no, that's it's always amazing how sensitive some of that data can be. I remember one of the places I worked at, someone had overwritten one of our models. And so, same thing, I went to go retrieve a backup of it. And it turns out our backup had not functioned in like 6 months. So thankfully I had a local copy on one of, like, I'd changed laptops or something and had a local copy. And so we were able to restore it. And it just made me go, like, you trust these systems and you think this is going to work. And it's so fragile, right? It's so easy because it's like that's years of work gone.
Yeah.
That's painful.
Well, it's another thing I try and impart on geologists is an external hard drives. They're pretty cheap these days, right? And even if your model is 6 months out of date, that's better than starting from zero.
Yeah, yeah, and I think it's a lesson to any companies that listen to this is, making it so that your employees can't, use external hard drives and things like that. You take a major risk because I think I've worked for 3 companies that we restored incredibly important data from someone's copy on an external hard drive, and I look at that, like, if that had been a policy there, then it would have just been gone, and it would have been years of work down the drain and with no copy thereof.
Well, that's exactly what happened at Twin Creeks. And, keep in mind, Twin Creeks is what? A pit that's 2 miles long and half a mile wide and no
Yeah.
geology model. And we brought in people from Denver and we brought in all kinds of modelers and we started where we were mining because that's where we needed it. But it literally was a couple years to rebuild that model. I don't know how many millions of dollars that probably cost Newmont, you know.
Jeez.
But
That's so painful.
I was uh, Nevada underground geology manager. So I had all the undergrounds under my umbrella, uh, including Leeville and Carlin and Chucker and Rain and Deep Post and Deep Star and Midas and all that. Plus, I was on the technical committee for the Barrick TRJV and some other things.
What an incredible time too, because that was kind of the heyday of all the underground operations in Nevada, right? So on the Newmont side, at least.
Yeah, that's right. It was. And we that was the first time where we had any kind of consistency between them. Standardized the software, we standardized the procedures, we standardized so you could literally go from one mine to the next, and other than the geology being different, the systems were the same. So that was a huge step. Another big thing that we did during that period is we formed a group called the Underground Projects Group. That was a couple of geologists and an engineer. They would sift through all the data, of all the different open pits and all of that, and look for potential underground opportunities. And then we funded that group to go with money to go drill some of these areas. And, quite a few deposits came out of that. Several of the portal mines came out of
Yeah,
that work from
wasn't
that
like
group.
Deep Bajo one of the ones that came from that?
Eat
I can't remember.
Bajo, Fence,
Okay, yeah.
can't think of the one that's kind of to the west of all of that, but
Exodus?
yeah, Exodus. Exodus came out
Yeah.
of that group. Some of the stuff at Quarry, we were looking at one at Twin Creeks and decided to do a layback instead. So that group produced a lot of good work, and that was a really good thing. For me
Mm.
personally, I was to the point where I was a senior manager, so I did a lot of HR, I did a lot of accounting, I did a lot of other work so that people at the sites could actually focus on geology and not have to deal with all the bureaucracy.
Yeah, I think that's one of the unsung parts of being, like, upper management is, you take on a lot of the not very fun tasks with that same idea as, like, trying to free it up so that the people at the face and doing, like, exploration don't have to, and it's a lot of time and effort, and it's very rarely does anybody know that you're even doing it, which is kind of frustrating. It's like how much effort it is, but it's critical to, like, free up those people to to do their job, right?
Yeah, and another thing I learned out of that was your rewards are different. They're longer term rewards, like the underground projects group. It was a couple years before anything started to come out of that, right? And it was a more of a long term satisfaction. I know another one, I had an employee that was in the wrong slot, and we moved them to a different slot, and they just blossomed, right? And they eventually had some pretty good promotions, well deserved, because recognizing that that person is in the wrong job, but if we move him over here, he has the skill set for that job. And so that was personally rewarding, right? That took several years before that became apparent.
Yeah, and that stuff's really it's really hard, right? Because often if you have a high performing employee or vice versa, you can start off with a low performing employee. If they're in the wrong role, then they might just appear to be really bad, and then all of a sudden, I think it takes knowing people, right? Like knowing the people that work for you and having conversations and being like, oh, okay, this doesn't sound like a good fit. What would be a good fit? And it's not always what people say they want to do that would be a good fit. Sometimes it's really getting to know the essence of what they're good at and what they're bad at to figure out how they're going to benefit personally and benefit the company the most. So it's incredibly rewarding when you see it work, right? And you see
Yeah.
someone go from being really unhappy and not doing well to blossoming, and it's like, oh, this is fantastic.
Yeah, no, it is very rewarding, but it's delayed gratifications, as opposed to, at the mine and you drill a really great hole, that's instant gratification, right?
Yeah.
So, but because I was landlocked behind a desk, really, after a while, I just kind of missed being in the trenches. And an opportunity came up to transfer to New Zealand and run their exploration program. That was a great opportunity on multiple fronts, right? Like it's New Zealand. The kids were at exactly the right age to go there.
Yeah, that's huge.
Explorate More grassroots exploration was something that I really hadn't done before. I'd done near mine exploration, with kind of brownfields. And so it was a new challenge for me as well. So we went to New Zealand for Newmont, to Waihi on the North Island.
What was your feeling during the time leading up to moving? Like, were you guys both like really excited, or was it like that, like a mix of excitement and being worried about what it was going to be like? What'd you guys go through?
No, my wife and I were both thrilled. We'd been to New Zealand before. We knew what it was like, beautiful country, really nice people. And, I was a little bit nervous about the job just because, it's again something new and different. But, we were happy to go there and we literally packed up the family in our suitcases and got on the plane and got there, and that's all we had was whatever was in the suitcase. And then I came there and I replaced another geologist who was leaving. And what had happened was that geologist had put all of his eggs in one project and drilled a
Hmm.
bunch of holes and found nothing. And so he left and I arrived and there was nothing. I had no projects to work on. I literally had to start from the beginning. So,
That is so daunting when you show up and there's nothing in the pipeline and you don't know anything about the geology yet, beyond your experience in other systems, and so you can at least look at similarities. But I've been there before where it's like you arrive and it's like there's not a single target, but we have a drill and it needs to be turning like next week. What are we gonna do? And you don't have the luxury of spending years to understand it and come up with targets, right? It's often you have to start generating targets immediately. So that must have been a great opportunity, but also terrifying.
Yeah, well, and admittedly, the first year there was a couple of targets that, if I had my choice, probably we wouldn't have drilled, but it was all we had. I've spent the first year or two with a camera around my neck, pretending to be an American tourist wandering through the bush, looking at projects, right? Doing all the research, doing all the paperwork and reports, maps, all that stuff, and then going out and assessing them. And over the course of about a year and a half, I built a pipeline of projects and we started in working on those. And so by, the end of the second year, we had a pretty good portfolio of some pretty compelling targets. I will say New Zealand is very prospective, very target rich environment. So that was obviously good. One of the problems I had though as we started drilling this portfolio is we kept hitting stuff, a meter at 11, 10 meters at 17, 2 meters at 25. And we kept hitting veins, and a lot of these would turn out to be, they're not consistent or they're relatively small scale, but I didn't never turn any projects over because we kept hitting ore grade intercepts. It was really almost a problem.
Especially if you're getting them in a geographically diverse area, because what, like, the idea is always like, oh yeah, no, we'll drill here, and if there's not much gold, then we'll move on to the next target. But if you're getting gold, especially those kind of grades and thicknesses and a variety of locations, it makes it really hard to discard targets, right? So that's often one of the big things, is
Yeah.
it's generating targets is one side of exploration, but killing off targets is another, right? And if you have a lot, you only have a limited amount of money to drill everything.
I also had to balance the project out because we had some helicopter supported projects. And so I didn't want to drill nothing but helicopter supported because, as you say, you only have so much budget a year. So I would balance one helicopter project with, say, three or four road accessible projects. And so I had to balance the pipeline that way. One of the things at that time that I started to focus on was a certain part of the Hauraki Goldfield, which is a classic epithermal deposit. Lots of literature and study have been done on the Hauraki Goldfield. But all the exploration to date had largely been in the andesite host rocks because that's what hosts Martha, which is world class. It's up over 10 million ounces and got 2 million ounces in reserves. So, I mean, it's a huge epithermal system.
Yeah.
Most, probably 95% of the production in the Rocky Goldfield came out of andesites. And yet, when I looked around, there's a big area of rhyolites over on the east side of the peninsula that were largely unexplored. And there were sinters that had never been put on a map. They'd never been sampled. Well, there's big areas of water table silica where you get silica forming at the water table around these epithermal systems. Again, never sampled, never mapped.
Wow.
So
What an opportunity.
yeah, I begin to focus on that side. And there, every district, and that's one thing I've learned and impart upon junior geologists, every district has its urban legends and known facts, quote unquote. Everybody knows that's the way it is. It's human nature. So in the Rocky Goldfield, and you can even read it in some of the major papers that have been written on the district, where they say that the andesites host the bulk of the deposits, and only andesites host big, wide, significant veins. The rhyolites make lousy host rocks, and they only do little skinny veins and small deposits and stuff. Well, that became self-fulfilling, right? Because everybody knew the andesites were where you needed to look. So everybody looked
Yeah,
in the
why would
andesites.
we drill there?
Yeah, why would you look at the rhyolites? And yet, I came from Midas, which is rhyolite hosted. I'd worked for Newmont on some other projects. Of course, Round Mountain is rhyolite hosted. McDonald is rhyolite hosted. I examined El Peñon for Newmont. That's rhyolite hosted. You look around the world, it's a major host rock of these kind of deposits. And I'm thinking, why is New Zealand different?
Mhm.
But, so we focused more on the rhyolite side and all these areas of silicification and sinters and stuff. And suddenly I'm getting all these intercepts. And yeah, a lot of them are small, insignificant and stuff. One of the things I told Newmont when they transferred me back, as I said, we're on the verge of something here. We keep hitting ore grade wherever we go. One of these things is bound to turn into something.
Yeah. 'Cause I think that's one of the biggest questions when you're doing greenfields exploration is there gold in this part of the system, or is there gold in this system? And you have an answer, a resounding yes. So then it's trying to find what's going to concentrate your gold, and where can you find maybe a pocket that's, or a control that's big enough to create a mine, right?
Yeah. Well, and another strange fact is the fourth largest producer in the district is rhyolite hosted, and yet there
Wow.
was this perception that rhyolite is terrible. So one of the deposits that we started to work on was UKP. It's actually Wharekirauponga, but the American quickly shortened that. But WKP, rhyolite hosted, it had been drilled in the 80s and early 90s to try and make an open pit. And it was a bunch of little veins that didn't connect with anything, and a kind of a sheeted vein set. They drilled a couple dozen holes and decided rightfully that this was never going to make an open pit. So the project sat there. It was impressive because it's a window in post-mineral rocks, and the entire window, 5 kilometers by 3 kilometers, is intensely silicified, and it's got these little veinlets here and there. So but when we went in there, I said, look, let's not get distracted with these little veins, like everybody else has done. They're not going to do anything. They're never going to
It's
make.
not going to suddenly become economic when it hasn't been with that many holes in it, right? You have to find something different.
That's right. They're not underground mineable. You're never going to open pit this. But in the district, there are it's a Horst and Grabens that have a northeast trend, and most of the major deposits veins to trend northeast. So I said, let's look for big through going structures in this area. It was helicopter supported. Early on, we would walk in there, and so it was an hour and a half drive to the trailhead and another hour and a half to 2 hours to just start your work. So once it became interesting and looked prospective, then we started to helicopter people in and out. But as we were mapping, all of a sudden all these little veins all trended north, and nobody could ever figure out, this is really unusual in the district, having north-south trending veinlets. They're all northeast. Well, when we were mapping, we mapped the vein that trended northeast, and it was a couple meters wide. And so we began to focus on that, and we drilled that vein, and it was over a kilometer long, and it had erratic intercepts in it. Some of, like I remember we had one that was 3 meters at 64 grams, but it was erratic. We couldn't put together an ore chute out of that. But it was proof of concept. Here's a major structure. It's over a vein over a kilometer long, and it's
Yeah, and over 100 gram meter intercept is indicative that you are in a real system.
yeah. And we were using CSAMT, and so as we used more and more of that, we said, wait a minute, what's this over here? So we turned the drill and drilled the other direction, and we hit another vein that's trending northeast. And it's got, I remember there was 3 meters at 32 in one of the intercepts. So we're hitting the right structures, and we're getting grade, even if it's not continuous. So things are starting to get interesting. And that was about the time Newmont kind of shut things down. They transferred me back to Nevada.
That's so hard to like at that point where you're having those kind of intercepts and then have to walk away from the project before you can really figure it out. That's tough.
Yeah. I think at that point, Newmont had decided they were going to sell Waihi. So, they were kind of beginning to prepare to package it up.
Yeah.
So I came back to Nevada. I first was responsible for all the underground or all the surface open pits on the Carlin Trend, all the geology. And then I went back into my old position of underground geology manager. And then, of course, I hit the magic number at Newmont and retired from there.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well,
How was that? Was that decision a hard one for you, or were you ready at that point?
I was kind of ready because I was back behind a desk again.
Yeah, doesn't seem to align with your passion, right? Like you've always struck me as, I mean, I've only met you a few times over the years, but you've always struck me as like a field geologist who wants to do exploration, right? And that's not a desk jockey job, right?
Yeah, and I was ready, and in hindsight, it was the thing to do. A lot of Newmont people told me I retired at exactly the right time.
What year was that, if you don't mind me asking?
It was 2015.
Okay, yeah.
So, uh, Anyway, so I retired, and that didn't last long. In the meantime, Oceana Gold had bought Waihi from Newmont. My old boss called me back and said, "Hey, come back to Waihi. We'd really like you to do your old job again." So I went back to Waihi and moved back into my same office with the same drip in the ceiling over my desk. And the
Like, ah, home again.
yeah, exactly. And, my old files and all that. And so I had a new staff. We had to hire new staff and gear up the exploration.
Did you come back as a consultant or did you come back as an
A
employee?
full-time employee. Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
So we hired a new staff, and we had still had all the land position, but we had to re-permit everything and stuff. So in the meantime, we did more, reconnaissance work. We did soil samples. We did more mapping, more geophysics, and finally got the permits to do drilling on several projects. So we went right back into WKP again. And there'd been a little bit of work after I was done out there. And a geologist had drilled and he'd hit this fault, and he'd hit the fault in several places, and it was a significant northeast trending fault that was 5 to 10 meters wide, but it was only running about a half a gram, and there was really a few skinny looking little veins, and it didn't look very good. But having worked up at WKP before and looking at that hole, as a matter of fact, when I left, I'd actually already flagged it that these holes were very deep, and there was 400 meters of up dip of the thing that hadn't been tested at all. And epithermals are very elevationally controlled. You have to hit them at exactly the right elevation.
Yeah, too shallow and you're above the boiling horizon and too deep and you're not destabilizing the fluid enough to drop out gold, right?
Yeah,
It's
and it can look
very specific.
pretty unimpressive, above or below.
Yeah.
So we got ready, and my entire staff was saying, "You're crazy to go back and drill over there." She said, "We should be drilling here because we've got all these, isolated high grade intercepts and stuff." And they'd
It looks exciting, right? It looks like you have, there's something there, you're trying to figure out what it is, and so that's always the most tempting target,
Mhm.
right? And sometimes it's trying to think more systematically about like, well, where do we have the mechanisms that we can fit a big enough deposit to form a mine in, and not just sporadic intercepts to continue chasing and get sporadic intercepts back, right?
Yeah, and, I they after I left, they had gotten an intercept that was 10 meters at 17 or something like that.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
And so everybody wanted to go back and follow up on that intercept and stuff. Well, I had drilled that off before, along strike for a kilometer, and I kind of knew what it looked like. And it's like, I think, we need to move on to someplace else. So I wanted to drill up dip of these old holes, and everybody thought I was crazy. And we put the first hole in there, and we hit an 8 meter wide quartz vein, and pretty significant, but my boss and I both looked at it and we kind of went, I don't think this is going to run. I mean, it's a really good looking vein, but it's not going to run. Well, it ran 10 grams.
That ain't bad at all.
No. So I swung the drill 120 meters to the north, and we hit 8.7 meters at 25.
Wow. That's just off to the races at that point where, because I mean, you've hit a lot of gold at this point, and that's always the thing is to go, at what point do you realize it's a discovery versus still hoping it might become a discovery?
Yeah, no, that second intercept, when we hit that, I knew we were onto something big because, an 8 meter vein is a significant structure, right?
Yeah.
Uh, and, we'd stepped over 120 meters and got even a better intercept than the previous one. So I kind of knew we were off to the races at that point. But we drilled on that thing, and by the time I left, we'd hit ore material, ore grade rock for a kilometer along strike
Fantastic.
and a couple hundred meters up and down dip, and it was still open.
That's So what was your feelings at this time? Like, were you getting really excited about it and just kind of like you start wondering how big it can be? And in the back of my mind, I've always known we will start hitting holes eventually that are dead. And like, what was your feelings?
Sky high, because as we drilled this thing off within a year, we looked at it and said, this thing has the potential to be 2 million ounces. You know,
Yeah, and had a really good grade as well, right?
yeah,
Like that's fantastic.
yeah. I mean, average width was 6 meters and average grade was 13 grams. You know, Now keep in mind, this is hosted in rhyolite, which is, as we all know, only hosts skinny little veins, right, and small deposits.
Yeah, and suddenly it's 8 meters wide and millions of ounces.
And it created a real stir in New Zealand, both with what's essentially the New Zealand Geologic Survey and particularly Auckland University. Nobody could
Mm.
believe that this thing was in rhyolites, and we had flocks of geologists coming to see it for themselves in the core shed.
I
It really created a stir. People couldn't believe it.
So we're like, yeah, this is like 15 episodes into this series, and I think we've covered 4 or 5, maybe 6 deposits. And this has become a real trend that a lot of these big discoveries have happened in rocks that everybody knew were dead. And it's just been eye-opening to me, like in my own career, how many places I've worked where everybody knew such and such unit never hosted, gold. And it's just made me such a skeptic to always, question it and to be like, oh well, how do we know that? And is it hearsay or have we actually tested this idea? So that's exciting.
Well, and I tell geologists all the time, just review in your mind all the big discoveries that have been made. And almost all of them are gone against conventional thinking. Upper plate rocks are a terrible host. Yeah, well, except at Marigold. There's always exceptions.
And it's like I kind of go back to like the rule I've learned from it is they don't have to be the best host rocks on paper. They just have to be better than their neighbors, right? There has to be some maybe rheological contrast or maybe like a grain size change. There has to be some thing that just makes them better than the rocks next to them because if the oil fluids are there and like you have tectonic forces at play, it just has to crack a little different than the rocks around it, right?
That's right. And, you know, there's always exceptions to the rule, right? You just have to get the right conditions. But
Yeah, yeah.
yeah, the BKP being hosted in a rhyolite just created a academic storm in New Zealand. People couldn't believe it. So
How fun. That must have just been a blast to see, yeah, to find success when everybody thinks you're crazy and thinks that it's doomed to failure. That must have just been fun.
yeah, no, it was a great time and pretty exciting. To this day, it's still open. They've extended it now 1.4 kilometers, and it's still open. And when you look at the resource on the thing, including inferred, it's pushing 3 million ounces now. So
That's great.
this is the
How exciting.
this is going to end up being the second largest deposit in the Hauraki Goldfield next to Martha, and it's hosted in rhyolites.
Yeah, in the known dead
In
rocks.
the
That's
known
that's
dead
that's great.
rocks. Yeah. I guess another thing too interesting, going back to the conventional thinking and stuff, I looked at the mapping and I'm a big believer in I don't care who mapped it, I think you should go out and remap it yourself
Mhm.
because you'll see things that other people don't see. Maybe, particularly if you're mapping stream beds, the outcrops have changed, as floods scour bedrock and bury other places and stuff. So that was one of the
Yeah,
things we did at WKP is we started fresh. We ignored the work that had been done and we remapped it. And it was really interesting laid out all the mapping, starting with mapping in the early 80s and all the way through the 90s. And there's like 7 different versions. But if you look, they're just variants on the original map. They just change details, but the original interpretation is carried all the way through for 20 something years. And then you hold up our map and it looks completely different.
I find I don't know, like I've been accused of being too much of a skeptic and throwing out things too readily. But I've seen that so many times where I think the next generation mapper comes in and they look at the old map and they go, well, everybody knows that that's a really good map, so I don't really want to change it. So they kind of collect like supporting data and they kind of put blinders on to see data that's different. And I've always just had the approach of, even if it's at a reconnaissance level when I go and visit a project, but it's like, all right, let's start as a contrarian and collect new data and come up with our conclusions, and then we can overlay it to see, does it match, is it, oh, and there's been a couple deposits that have been just, like, there's, I won't mention any names, but there was one I went to up in Canada a while back, and we were doing like a bunch of traverses in the field, and I was writing up my ideas and kind of sketching out what I thought was going on, and then look at their map, and it was pretty much bang on to what I saw, and I was like, that's very rare in my experience, and it's more common, I think, for people to try to make their maps look like, because it's their boss, or they're, maybe one of their boss's friends, or we brought in some high powered consultant and you don't want to prove him wrong. And not to say that there's not good high powered consultants, because there certainly are. But it's a I think that's a really valid thing, is to say start from scratch and see what you see. Walk in with open eyes to observing data and coming up with your own interpretation. And sometimes it feels like it's a waste, but yeah, but what a cool experience to do.
Yeah, and there were some red flags when you looked at the mapping. You had a swarm of faults that crisscrossed each other and didn't offset each other, right? And it's like, well, that's not, something's not right there. And we had areas where it was mapped as fresh andesite, and yet when you looked at the magnetic signature, it was demagnetized. And
Yeah,
what we
definitely
found,
not fresh anymore.
well, it was landslide deposits. So we had 20 or
Huh.
30 feet of landslide debris on top of altered rocks. So the magnetics were seeing right through it to the altered rock underneath.
Wow. Yeah, that's like that. I don't know. Just going back to like the first principles, there's so much value in that. It's just like, okay, if this is rhyolite, it should have this magnetic signature, like, similar to other things. And then you go, okay, it doesn't. So why not? Like, let's go out and let's look. And I like that, also that approach of targeted mapping to answer things, because you don't have years to remap an entire area. So it's like, all right, we need to understand why this is different than what we expect. What's going on there, and let's head there to understand it.
Yeah, no, that's very true. Well, success at WKP, then somebody in the corporate office woke up and said, "Hey, Rick, he's worked in Nevada. Let's send him to Reno and open an office." So I went to Reno for Oceana, opened an office. We started, picking up projects and doing exploration and stuff, worked several up to drill ready status, drilled a couple, and then Oceana got in financial trouble for a short period of time and panicked and laid everybody off. So
That's painful to watch, isn't it? Where it's, because it's like, it's never, I mean, it can happen, but so often it's not the first projects you target. It's not but it's what you learn in that process.
mm,
And you just kind of have to churn through targets, right? Where it's like, okay, these are good for these geological reasons. And then as we started, like drilling, we didn't see these things. And so then we move on to the next target. But if you get interrupted, like, especially by layoffs, because that's been my experience so many times, is you'll be like in the middle of this investigation that's going to take a year or whatever. And then it's like, yeah, no, now there's layoffs. So we're not going to finish that.
well, even more frustrating, one of the projects we worked up, we did all the mapping, the geophysics, the soil sampling. We had it fully permitted, and then Oceana dropped it. And another company came in, set up on one of our permitted pads, and made a discovery.
This is one of the fun parts of this podcast, is exploring like this concept of discovery is always talked about like it's a, like a picture in time, right? But it's usually a movie. And Ahmad talks about this quite a bit, where you have this series of frames, and you think about that, like, that company may have just drilled there because that's all that was permitted. So they may not have even had a good target. And I don't know anything about it, but it's just like, and so sometimes it's the previous frames give all the reference for the actions that happen later on in the movie.
Yeah, yeah. I might have taken that press release and emailed it to a couple people at Oceana too. So,
That's vindicating, though, because at the end of the day, we're out there trying to make new discoveries, right?
mm,
And so if someone makes a discovery using our work, it's still pretty vindicating, right? It's nice. And same thing, like if you ever look at a project and you evaluate it and you're like, oh no, I think this is a dog, and then someone else goes and drills it a bunch and then it turns out it's a dog, it's pretty vindicating.
Yeah, yeah. Well, after that, then I consulted, and I did consulting for, I guess, 5 years, focused on low sulfidation deposits, and very rewarding. I really enjoy working on those. New Zealand was really where I honed my skills. It was interesting there because the Hauraki Gold Field is essentially the fossil equivalent of the modern Taupo volcanic zone, which is New Zealand's Yellowstone.
Yeah.
And you can literally track the dates from the northern tip of the Coromandel Peninsula and the Hauraki Gold Field. It starts out at 14, and as you move south, it goes to 12, 11, 8, 7, 6, 4, 2 million years old, and then suddenly you're in the modern Taupo volcanic zone. So you can literally track the path of the geothermal system with age dates. But what was really cool about it was we'd be up exploring in the Hauraki Gold Field and we'd see some weird feature and we didn't understand it. Well, let's take a trip down to the Taupo volcanic zone about an hour away and go look for it. So we'd go out and look in these modern geothermal systems and then, oh, look, here it is. Oh, and that's the context it's in. I get it. So I
I
really
think that's
learned a lot from that.
it's genuinely amazing to have an analog that you can go look at and say, okay, we're seeing these textures and we think this is probably, at surface and then it's been buried. And then you can go to a modern hydrothermal system and see those textures at surface and say, oh, okay, that is exactly this. And it can help you to understand also some of the ideas of original horizontality, though they're valid, like the topography during these times is often very rugged, and you think about like additional volcanic flows coming down, they're going to be flowing over a very rugged topography, and so it's not perfectly flat systems that you're looking at. It's really bizarre and strange geomorphology features, and there's nothing better than seeing that actually analog for what you're looking for in your exploration work.
Yeah, that's a very good point. It's a trap I will even fall in is after a while you get into this trap where you're thinking in terms of these volcanic areas are layer cake. And then I have to go to some place like Lassen or someplace and look at the modern system. And like you say, it's got, topography and it's got intercanyon flows and, overlapping flows and things like that. And I have to remind myself, no, it's not layer cake.
Yeah, it's such a concept built into geology that it's almost hard to unlearn. Like I remember early in my career working in this one area, and I was mapping Fiamme, like like little pumice
Hmm.
flattening and like this tuff. And I was looking at it, I'm like, it looks like it's folded. I have these really weird, like things all over. Like they're angled over here and they're flat here and they're dipping back towards me over there. And I was talking to someone, and they're like, oh yeah, this is probably like like this rhyolite probably flowed down a canyon, and then it's compacting parallel to the walls of the canyon, and it's not folding or anything like that. It's like it's showing you what the topography was pre-flow, and it was like, oh, that's fascinating.
Yeah. No, that's right. But yeah, I really enjoyed the consulting because I got to see a lot of interesting things. I got to pick the stuff that interested me. I went back and consulted for a different company in New Zealand, Japan, all over the Western US. And so it's been a great experience. But
Yeah.
I've now flunked retirement 2.0 and I'm back to working full time again.
You sound passionate about it, and it's hard to because I think that's the thing with retirement is you have to find a passion to replace this passion, and most people never find that, right? It's like so it's you can't just go back to like, okay, I'm gonna go and sit and read books unless that's your passion. Like one of my old bosses loves woodworking, and so that's his passion, and so he's loving retirement for that. But yeah, I think like for a lot of people, like I know that for me, I love geology, and so I think my retirement would look very similarly. It's like, well, I'm back to doing this because I love it.
Yeah. Well, in the case of the consulting, the other nice thing is that, I do it, I kind of do it at my hours. And basically, take that money, and that was my wife and my travel money. So we used it to travel, you know.
Oh yeah, how fun is that?
Yeah.
That's
So,
unless there's anything else you want to add to this one.
uh, no, I think, we captured enough of it anyway, just to say that, Oceana is still drilling on WKP and it's still open. They are actually permitting now a 7 kilometer long adit to get to access it and mine it. So
Yeah, wow. I would say that's definitely fits the definition of a discovery then.
yeah, and the other thing is, we found two other major structures, and we still don't know the extent of the alteration, and it's really like discovering a new district, you know,
Yeah.
because we have three known veins with ore grade intercepts on them, and they're all open, and we don't know how big this thing is. So, as you say, pretty exciting.
Yeah, and it's its own challenge too, where if you like a lot of companies will look at, sorry, people will look at companies with good land holdings and they're like, "Oh, I can't believe they're not just, exploring over there." And it's like, "Well, you only have so much money to explore and build mines." And so it's often like, these projects are kind of locked up until this mine starts producing and then frees up some cash flow to go and explore the next target. And so it's a little frustrating when you work somewhere like that because it'll be years or maybe even a decade before you actually get to do exploration on that next target area after you've made a big discovery.
Yeah. And I still believe there's more discoveries to be made down there. It's definitely a target-rich environment.
Digging deep where the stories hide, through the hills and the mountains wide. Pickaxe swing and the earth unfolds, chasing dreams in the dirt and gold. Geology calling under our feet, secrets are buried in the rock and heat. With a heart full of wonder and a map in hand, exploring the treasures of this great land.